All right. The goal of this is to talk about presentations, expectations that I have, and hopefully give you some tips. Give me just a sec. There we go. Let's minimize this. Let's do a quick screen share. All right. So hopefully you can see this presentation here. So as I'm about to start, I want to emphasize that the kinds of things you're going to see on these particular slides that I'm about to show are actually substantially different than what you are going to have on your slides. The reasoning, my slides are here to educate you a little bit. And so I've got way more words than you should. And you'll see as we go through this. In general, I try to have some slides and then I'll pop in something in red. For example, let's go to here. Let me do this. Let me get in here. There. So we have a comment that I'm making in red, or so I'll add in little comments here. And so just keep that in mind. And I'll try and link these actual presentations in the YouTube video so that afterwards you can download them and look at them and use them as a template, but delete a lot of the stuff that I have. Okay, so you want to have a title that's meaningful but as concise as possible, and you should use the date of the presentation. Obviously, this is a pretty boring title slide. You should probably have an internet image. If you're using an image from the internet, you should cite your source. For me, I'm just going to say put a web link on the page in 14-point font. Otherwise, everything should be 18-point font or larger. Always be thinking, can somebody see this from the back of the room? All right. Speaking of, let's look at some fonts and some choices here. When you're presenting on a computer screen, some choices are particularly bad. And my opinion was the ones at the bottom maybe to read, but you could decide that. But in general, always strive for high contrast images. High contrast meaning easy to see at the back of the room. My expectations regarding figures and equations. Sure, you could search the internet, but I want you to learn how to use the equation editor, how to make your own figures, and how to make plots, make your own plots. The reasoning, learning the tools is more professional, and eventually it will be faster. So obviously your first talk, yeah, it might be faster to search the internet because making figures for the first time and learning how to use the editor is going to be an investment. But in the long run, it should be a smart investment. There's training videos I've made. Again, you can look at my playlist. And all right, that's enough for this. A side note, I've added some slide numbers. That's on the insert tab and the header and footer. That's probably a good idea just because then it makes it easy for people to ask questions about your slides if you add a slide number. All right, pretend this is the goal of the real talk here. Can we model this zombie's motion as a two-stage acceleration, or what does this zombie do while it's running, etc.? Obviously, this is not very good, but if you had a photo or figure, that could help. And one thing I should mention here, try to always include a ruler or a scale bar or something of a known size in your pictures or your figure or something like that. All right, let's clear those out and go to the next slide. All right, so procedure, you're not going to show bulleted lists, but you might have a video on loop and you could be explaining things. If you are using a video, make sure you have a backup of that video in some other format, not just trusting that it embedded properly in the PowerPoint. If you're putting an image there and it's not your own, remember to cite it. The idea is to explain with pictures and videos without subjecting people to boring lists. All right. Theory, there's a bunch of words here, but one of the things that's very useful, and I'll point this out, I know there's a lot of words here. Again, you should not have this many words. This is to teach you, so I want you to be able to read this later. But if you have a block diagram, that should simplify your complicated looking pictures, and that makes it easier. If you need to know how to make those diagrams right here. So imagine that all of this crap here is a well-made figure or perhaps a picture of your apparatus and a figure. All right, so keep that in mind. Let me get out of that. So you could imagine animating in some comments here like this. You could have some images. All right. And animating in content is crucial. All right. And so I could teach you how to do that. Basically, what I do is I just copy the slide multiple times. Notice the slide numbers are already up to 16 here in the bottom. But when I do this, right, the idea is notice we'll go to slide 17 here. Oops. And all I did was I copied the same slide, and then I made the master slide, which has all the content, and then I made copies of it and deleted stuff so that it looks like it's animating in. That's why my slide numbers are going to be bonkers here. Whatever. Let's get back to the slide. So this theory right now is just a bunch of garbage. It doesn't matter. I'm just making up some placeholders. You could be talking about other things, whatever you're doing in your experiment. Okay, great. Some more ideas. There's a splash of color every once in a while. It's nice to use the color. Notice that I'm using the equation editor here. And yeah, it's annoying at first, but it's sure going to be nice to eventually have all of these things look really nice. There's a video, training video on how to use the equation editor as well. Okay, let's keep going. And at this point, maybe it's a good time to revisit your slide. You've talked about a theory and the procedure. Maybe you should remind people, what are we trying to do? We're trying to do this. Okay. And then you could get to some data. Well, here's a plot of the zombies motion, blah, 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 blah. Plots, I expect your plots to be really amazing and incredible. Notice there's a bunch of things here. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can download the presentation and use this as a checklist. Some things I guess I should point out. 18-point font. This is the one that students forget all the time. Okay, check that first thing, and that's everything, including the numbers, the axis labels, all of this stuff. And then in particular, students are usually very bad at how to label the axes. All right. And the axes are generally labeled at the positive end. So if you have data that has plus and minus coordinate systems, you have to deal with that. All right, never mind. I'll leave that out. Let's keep going. All right. Oh, and notice these slides are very big. And you might be wondering, oh, that looks cool. He animated in some slopes here. How did I do that? The trick here is the following. When you add these in, the computer will sometimes screw up all the formatting. So again, you could download this and read this, but essentially the trick is put the graph on here at some small size, and then put in all your equations here, and then stretch everything full size. And when you save the file, it won't ruin your formatting. Just trust me on this. If you're putting equations on your plots, make sure you do this procedure. All right, let's keep rolling. And why might you do things like this? As you animate things in, you can control the flow of information, such as in this case, we're looking at the XT and the VT stacked. Notice the time axes aligned, blah, 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 blah. Let's first consider the velocity here at about 0.15 seconds or something like that. And notice I can show and control the flow of information. So I'm talking about, you can see this on the XT, you can see it on the VT plot. This number right here corresponds to about 1.9. This slope corresponds to about 1.9. And I feel really good about that. Once you've talked about this, you can animate in a bunch of them at once and people kind of understand what you're talking about. So going backwards a bit, I'm going to go backwards. Oops. We start out with the plots, we animate in one example, and then we put in a bunch of stuff all at once. Okay, great. Similarly, you could have a VT plot. We could put in some animations now that people kind of understand what I'm doing here. I'm drawing slopes. That's awesome. You can animate in a comment. Here's another thing you might do. Let's say you have a trend line. You could literally put the equation of the trend line on the plot to help people remember, so they don't have to say, what was the theory? Oh yeah, that was the theory, right? And then you list the constant values that were used in this particular theoretical equation. Aha, so now I can see the terminal velocity is 4.5 centimeters per second, and this constant alpha is 5.0 seconds to the -1. So maybe we don't know what these models mean right now, but the idea is people could see the equation, see the trend line, and see the parameters used to make the trend line all right there. And you could animate that stuff in so it doesn't scare the crap out of people when you first put it up. You could do similar things with areas. You could talk about areas and displacements, just giving you some ideas. You could also have a fun slide at some point. People might be getting bored. All right. Anyways, some ideas there. And now we revisit the goal at the end. This is critical. Always come back to the goal at the end. And then what you could do is you could animate in some results, say blah, 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 blah. And then for the other result, blah, 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 blah. And so that might be a good way to end your slide. And in particular, what in an ideal world, you could actually make this final slide first and then copy and paste this to the very beginning of your talk. And when you do that, you ensure that you're asking the same questions that you're going to answer. And that just, right, overall, what are you doing in this talk? You're telling people what you're going to say, then you're saying it, and then you're summarizing, saying what you said. Tell them what you're going to say it, tell them what you said. All right. And once you get your talk made, you're not done. You got to look it over. Once your draft is there, read the manual, grade yourself with the rubric or whatever you want, and skim the student feedback form and self-critique your own work, and then try and incorporate that. Furthermore, practice. Geez, the worst thing people do is when they don't practice, they just look terrible. So you might use a ruler as a point. Whoops, let me go back up, give my annotations. You want to split the talk up so everybody's getting about the same amount of time. You might be using rulers in this class, but in general, modern talks, you have to be ready to give this talk online. Maybe that's a Zoom interview or a report to your boss via Zoom. And so you can't always use a pointer. You can't count on it. So you should always rely on animations, all right? When you're giving a talk, actually speak out loud, even if you're mumbling to yourself in the garage or something, right? Give the talk, all right? And stay on time. The reason you practice is it shows you respect the audience enough to get done on time and yet also say what needs to be said. So practice. And a trick that you could do is if you have a really good speaker in your group, they might be the last speaker so that they can kind of adjust the time as needed. Sometimes I'll throw in a few extra slides, right? So you could have a few extra slides or maybe have a few slides you could throw out. That way that good speaker can kind of adjust the timing. And I think that's pretty much it. So, all right, that's all I wanted to say. I have there's going to be 2 talks let me stop the share real quick. So the idea is I'm in the links to the YouTube video. I'll also link this talk that you just looked at, as well as one I made for my electricity and magnetism course. And you could use those for just to get ideas of how to present things. That's it.